Now that we've established the importance of soils, let's talk a little bit about how we can conserve them so that they can continue to supply food for future generations. So there's 4 basic ways that we can maintain the soil's health and to make sure that it's still productive for crops and to make it a good habitat for the many critters that live in our soils. These 4 strategies include the following. So the first one is that you want to disturb the soil minimally. So the less that you dig up that soil, the better it is for maintaining the soil structure so that it's not subject to erosion. It's also important to grow or plant a diversity of plant species or crops in the soil. This is important because some plants extract different nutrients than others from the soil, and some plants even help to replenish nutrients in the soil. So things like soybeans help to replenish nitrogen in the soil, and so that helps that soil stay healthy and stay full of nutrients. It's also important to keep living plants in the soil as long as possible. So plants have roots, and these roots help to stabilize the soil and reduce erosion. And then finally, you can also reduce erosion by covering the soil at all times, and this can include the use of cover crops or mulches. So soil degradation is defined as the loss of the soil's ability to support plant life or to serve other ecosystem functions. And there's a number of different causes of soil degradation. So one would be just overall soil erosion. This can occur from when you till the soil. So you might have seen like tilling devices on farms that dig up and turn over the soil. And you can see in this picture here, when you do that, a lot of the smaller fine particles of soil then go into the air and they can get blown away. And so that soil is not going to maintain all the different soil size particles that it should. Also, when you till, it can also compact the soil because you're taking this big tractor over the surface, and that prevents the soil from being properly aerated. There's also a process called differential erosion, which can lead to desertification. We'll talk about that briefly in a minute. And then salinization is also can lead to the loss of the soil's ability to support plant life. And in this case, salinization refers to the soil becoming too salty for plants. And so I should mention, this was a no-till thing, so it's not a till, it's not a tiller, but it is still putting dust in the air. So even when it's not tilling the soil, it's still disturbing the soil. So it's better than a till system, but it's still causing a bunch of dust to go into the air. The process of soil erosion occurs when soil particles are picked up and moved and carried away from where they were in the soil. And this can occur because of wind or water erosion. In general, the layer of soil that's removed is the topsoil, so that's the O and A horizon, and those are the 2 most important horizons for plant growth. And so those are critically important. You don't want to get rid of them, and that's what's being eroded away. The best protection against this is to have some kind of cover on the soil, and in particular, a vegetated cover is best. So there's a number of reasons for this. So plants, when they're on the soil, all the leaves and the stems of the plants help to shelter the soil so that when raindrops hit it, they're not making a large impact. The plant roots also help hold the soil in place. And when wind is blowing over the soil surface, the plants help to slow the wind so that it's not lifting up those fine particles and removing them. So an example of wind and water erosion is shown here in the beautiful mesas of sandstone in Monument Valley, Arizona. You can see differential erosion. So some soil in the area was more subject to erosion, and this is like bedrock that wasn't as subject to erosion. But These are beautiful landforms that result from erosion. Wind erosion, you've probably seen this if you've ever seen a sand dune. So sand is easily moved by high winds also. And so sand dunes migrate. Often we think of sand dunes as like, well, we know sand dunes are in this location, but sand dunes move frequently because of wind erosion. There is a set of steps of erosion, or different types of erosion, and we'll just go over like the progression of it. So splash erosion is when raindrops hit the soil surface and break up the soil into clumps. And then the dislodged sediments can fill spaces between clumps and allow less water to infiltrate. So that's splash erosion. Sheet erosion occurs when water that's running off, that's traveling over the surface, so water runoff, is occurring very quickly, so it's fast moving water and it can pick up and carry soil with it. And then gully erosion occurs when water converges into rivulets, which are small rivers or streams, and those rivulets, the water in them gains speed and it can carry even larger particles, so rocks, for example. This picture is a really nice example of sheet and rill erosion. So you can see the sheet erosion is what's occurring over the main surface of the land, and it's really washed away a lot of the surface of the soil. And then you can see these little gullies, and so that's gully and rill erosion, and that's formed when you get the rivulets forming over the land surface. Here's a gully, so this is wider than a rill, and you can see where the water has washed away. It's like a little riverbed, washed away that soil. Okay, so something we see commonly in desert environments like Arizona would be desert pavement. Desert pavement is something that forms when wind and water, especially wind in the desert, picks up the lighter soil particles, so clay and humus, and carries those particles away, but not the larger particles. And what happens is the sand and gravel settle in and form this crust on the soil almost, and it's just it's almost like a pavement surface. Another thing we see are cryptogamic crusts. These occur when soils are saturated with water, and also primitive plants grow on the soil surface. And this stabilizes the surface, which is good, but it also, the formation of the algae, lichens, and mosses on the soil surface, it forms kind of like a crust on top of the soil, and it prevents water from infiltrating, and it prevents seeds from other plants from coming in and getting established in the soil. This is a picture of desert pavement, and so you can see that basically all that's left are big rocks, gravel, and sand particles, and the wind has removed the finer, smaller soil materials. Another type of very susceptible soil are soils that we see in drylands or grasslands. These are great lands for grazing animals, but they do have some particular specific issues to them. So drylands, as you may or may not know or remember, are areas that have low rainfall and long dry seasons, and so that means that they have drought periods throughout the year. Grasslands are defined based on how much water they receive and not necessarily temperature. Grasslands and drylands cover about 40% or 2/5 of Earth's land area, and as we see the climate changing, this is actually increasing. So it's grasslands and drylands will cover more than 40% of land area before long. And these areas, because they do have periods of drought when the vegetation kind of dies back, they are more susceptible to erosion because they don't have a good plant structure holding the soil in place. They're also very susceptible to wildfire, so that's another issue that we won't discuss here, but because they have these long periods of drought, it can cause issues. During the Dust Bowl, that's a classic example of wind erosion that we saw, and that the Dust Bowl occurred in the Midwestern U.S. and the Western states also, and that was because there was a lot of different things going on. There was overtilling, there was deforestation, and then drought, which led to major dust storms occurring in these regions. Okay, so desertification doesn't mean that the deserts are advancing. It's not like, you know, where you can imagine with the sand dunes that we saw, you know, you can kind of imagine them kind of moving and taking over good land. That's not what desertification is referring to. That desertification is referring to the productivity of drylands and how, as they get drier and hotter, that they're becoming less productive and less plants can survive there. And then as a result, these lands become more susceptible to soil erosion and the removal of that clay and humus material, which in turn causes the soil to be, it holds on to less nutrients, so it decreases the cation exchange capacity or the nutrient holding capacity of that soil. And then so over time, that soil becomes more and more like a desert soil because it doesn't have the plants there, and it's a cycle that occurs. So the causes of erosion in this process can be more than one. So extended droughts can cause this erosion to occur and cause desertification. Overgrazing of the land also causes it. Deforestation, so if the land was a forest and then you take all the trees off and then that soil surface is exposed, then that can cause desertification. Or if you just simply try and get too much growth of crops out of it. So if you keep putting crop after crop in there and not replenishing the soil with crops that help to bring more nutrients back into the soil, that can cause desertification.